This bad stuff happens. And for 33 hours, I was praying that if this had to happen here, that it wouldn't be one of us, that somebody drove from another state, somebody came from another country. Sadly, that prayer was not answered the way I hoped for, just because I thought it would make it easier on us if we could just say, hey, we don't do that here. And indeed, Utah is a special place. We lead the nation in charitable giving. We lead the nation in service every year. But it did happen here.
For my husband's have no idea what they have done. They Charlie because he preached a message of patriotism, faith, and of God's merciful love. But they should all know this. If you thought that my husband's mission was powerful before, you have no idea. You have no idea what you just have unleashed across this entire country. In this world, you have no idea. You have no idea the fire that you have ignited within this wife. The cries of this widow will echo around the world like a battle cry. To everyone listening tonight across America, the movement my husband built will not die. It won't. I refuse to let that happen. It will not die.
Something isn't adding up in the shocking death of Charlie Kirk, and the deeper we dig, the darker it gets. What first looked like a random act of political violence is now being tied to whispers of secret deals, billionaire betrayals, and even an alleged ordered hit. His widow Erica is speaking out. Candace Owens is fueling conspiracy theories, and law enforcement is under fire for what some claim is a cover-up. If you thought this story was straightforward, think again, because the rabbit hole is deeper than anyone imagined. Something doesn't add up about the shocking death of Charlie Kirk. From the very beginning, the story seemed too simple, too clean, like the kind of headline meant to shut down questions before they even started. Was this really just a lone madman in the crowd, a random political attack gone too far? Or was Charlie tangled up in something darker, a deal gone bad, powerful enemies who decided to silence him, or even a carefully planned setup that was never supposed to see the light of day? Already, cracks are showing in the official story. Witnesses, insiders, and even people closest to Charlie are suggesting there's more to this tragedy than what's being told. His widow, Erica, isn't just mourning, she's warning. In an emotional statement, she vowed that those responsible for her husband's death would regret what they've unleashed. And then there's Candace Owens, fanning the flames of suspicion, hinting at billionaires, cover-ups, and a conspiracy that reaches far beyond one night on a college campus. When grief, politics, and power collide, the truth is rarely straightforward. And in Charlie's case, it looks like the deeper you dig, the stranger it gets. It all started like just another campaign stop. Charlie Kirk was at Utah Valley University, standing on stage in front of a packed auditorium. The energy in the room was tense, but familiar. He was in the middle of one of his trademark fiery debates, this time sparring with an audience member over gun laws. Supporters cheered, critics booed, and for a moment it seemed like business as usual for Turning Point USA's controversial leader. But then everything shifted in an instant. Witnesses say the debate grew louder, sharper, and just when it seemed like Charlie was about to land one of his big applause lines, a single crack split the air. At first, people thought it might have been a mic popping or something falling in the crowd. But then came the screams. The shot had hit him directly in the neck. According to multiple reports, the bullet tore through his carotid artery, one of the body's most vital blood vessels. In that split second, the atmosphere went from charge to pure chaos. Witnesses described the scene as surreal. Charlie stumbling, his hand instinctively reaching for his throat before collapsing to the ground. Blood was everywhere, and the injury was so catastrophic that he appeared to lose consciousness almost immediately. The crowd erupted in panic, some ducking for cover, others rushing toward the stage in disbelief. Security scrambled, people shouted for medics, and within seconds the room was filled with sheer hysteria. What should have been another night of political theater had instead turned into a nightmare that no one in the audience will ever forget. From the very moment the news broke, emotions ran high. Within minutes, Charlie's supporters were already framing the tragedy as political terrorism, pointing the finger at liberals who, in their view, had finally taken things too far. On social media, hashtags exploded with claims that Charlie had been silenced for his beliefs. Commentators on the right called it the inevitable result of so-called left-wing hate, and the narrative spread like wildfire. But then came the twist no one saw coming. When law enforcement finally revealed the prime suspect, it wasn't a left-wing radical or some out-of-state agitator. Instead, it was Tyler Robinson, a 22-year-old white conservative from Utah. The revelation shocked not just Charlie's followers, but the entire political landscape. The tidy narrative of liberals gone too far suddenly unraveled, leaving more questions than answers. Even Utah's own governor stumbled in the aftermath, making comments that only fueled the backlash. In a statement, he admitted he had prayed the shooter would be an outsider, maybe an immigrant, maybe someone from another state, just so Utah could distance itself from the ugliness. "I hope we could say, that doesn't happen here," he explained. But his words landed like a gut punch. Instead of calming tensions, they made it seem like the truth was somehow less convenient than the myth. Critics slammed him for prioritizing optics over reality, and the controversy only added fuel to an already raging fire. What was supposed to be a clear-cut story of political violence had turned into something far murkier. A conservative leader had been gunned down, but the accused wasn't the enemy everyone expected. It was one of their own. And that single revelation blew the case wide open. Not long after Tyler Robinson's name was released to the public, his family came forward in disbelief. And leading the charge was his grandmother, who flat out refused to accept the official story. In an emotional interview, she insisted that the young man she helped raise could not have possibly pulled the trigger that ended Charlie Kirk's life. She painted a picture of Tyler as quiet, soft-spoken, and anything but violent. "I don't think he's ever even fired a gun," she said. "He doesn't hunt. He's never shown interest in weapons. And I know for a fact he doesn't own any. There's just no way he could have been that precise, that deadly. That's not who he is." Her words cut against the grain of the public narrative, and they planted a seed of doubt that quickly began to spread. Because here's the thing, she wasn't the only one questioning it. Online, people started asking how a 22-year-old with no military background, no training, and no history of violence could carry out what many described as a professional-level hit. The shot to the carotid artery was almost surgically precise. Could that really have been the work of a rookie with no experience? Or was Tyler being set up as the perfect scapegoat, a disposable name to tie off a messy story? The more people thought about it, the less sense it made. And that's when whispers of something larger began to take hold. Maybe Tyler wasn't the real mastermind. Maybe he wasn't even involved at all. Maybe he was just a fall guy in a cover-up far bigger than anyone was ready to admit. And this is where the story really begins to spiral. Enter Candace Owens, who wasted no time blasting holes in the official narrative and fueling speculation that Charlie Kirk's death wasn't random at all. She began pointing to details that, in her words, didn't just raise red flags, they lit up like fireworks. For one, she highlighted a private jet that left Provo Airport just an hour after the shooting. The plane mysteriously dropped off the radar mid-flight before reappearing again on its way back. To Candace, this wasn't a coincidence. She publicly asked why the plane's tracking had gone dark and who was on board, suggesting that whoever pulled the trigger wasn't working alone and might have had help getting out of town. Then came the whispers of shadowy Discord chats. Screenshots began circulating online, hinting at underground groups discussing Charlie in the days leading up to the attack. Candace claimed that some of those chats were linked to young men like Tyler, but she argued that the real directors, the people pulling the strings, were still hidden. "Be very wary," she tweeted, "of the ones telling us not to ask questions. That's how they bury the truth. But perhaps her boldest claim centered on billionaire donors. According to Candace, Charlie had been under immense pressure in the weeks before his death. He was allegedly clashing with some of the very people who had once funded his movement. One rumor she amplified suggested that a major donor threatened to pull support unless Charlie cut ties with Tucker Carlson. Candace even hinted that Charlie was ready to blow the whistle, and that his death came just as those tensions were peaking. And then there's the FBI. Almost immediately after the shooting, federal agents swooped in and took the case from local police. To some, it looked like efficiency. To Candace, it looked like interference. She argued that if the feds really wanted answers, they would have released every photo and video from that night and let the public help track down leads. Instead, she accused them of withholding evidence and even scrubbing digital trails before anyone could connect the dots. So now the question isn't just who killed Charlie Kirk, it's why. Was this a lone gunman acting on impulse? Or was it a carefully orchestrated political hit, timed perfectly to silence a man who was becoming too dangerous to certain powerful interests? The more Candace pushed, the more it felt like the truth was being kept just out of reach, hidden behind closed doors, sealed files, and powerful people who didn't want it getting out. If you thought Candace Owens was going to back down under pressure, think again. In the days that followed, she doubled down harder than ever, making it clear she believed Charlie Kirk's death wasn't just tragic, it was calculated. She went on social media and flat out asked, who ordered the hit on Charlie? To her, Tyler Robinson was just a pawn, and the real players were still out there, hiding behind money, influence, and federal protection. Meanwhile, the FBI tried to steer the story in a very different direction. They released statements saying their focus was on radicalization. According to federal sources, they were combing through Tyler's online history, Discord logs, and even alleged dark web activity, insisting this was the act of a young man manipulated by extremist groups. They framed it as a familiar narrative, another disaffected youth radicalized by the wrong voices online. But Candace wasn't buying it. In her view, this wasn't about some anonymous chat room on the internet. This was about powerful billionaires, shady deals, and the people Charlie had supposedly angered in the weeks before his death. She accused the FBI of creating a convenient scapegoat story to bury the truth. If they wanted real answers, she argued, they would have released all the footage immediately. The internet would have solved this in hours. Instead, they locked everything down. And that tension between the official version and the conspiracy version only deepened the divide. On one side, federal agents and mainstream outlets pushing the radicalization theory. On the other, Candace, Charlie's widow Erica, and a growing chorus of skeptics who believed the truth was being hidden on purpose. Each day, the story felt less like a tragedy and more like a power struggle, one between the people demanding answers and the institutions determined to control the narrative. And then came the moment that shifted everything from whispers of conspiracy to a raw, emotional call to action. Charlie's widow, Erica Kirk, stepped forward, and what she said was less a eulogy and more a declaration of war. Through tears, her voice breaking but fierce, she told the world that those responsible for her husband's death had no idea what they had just unleashed. She spoke of Charlie's mission, patriotism, faith, and a belief that God had called him to shake the nation awake. But she made it clear that his mission wouldn't die with him. Instead, she vowed it would only grow stronger, fueled now by her grief and her fury. If you thought my husband's voice was powerful, she said, you have no idea the fire you've lit inside me. The room fell silent as she described how Charlie's death would not silence the movement he built, but ignite it into something far bigger. She warned that the cries of a widow could echo louder than any political rally, reverberating across the country as a battle cry. Her pain, raw and unfiltered, turned into a promise. Charlie's legacy would not be buried. His killers may have taken his life, but they had also awakened a force they could never contain. For supporters, Erica's words were more than heartbreaking. They were galvanizing. She wasn't just mourning a husband. She was transforming her grief into a mission of her own, one that threatened to keep Charlie's name alive in ways even his enemies couldn't have anticipated. And as powerful as Erica's words were, they also left us with a haunting thought. This story is far from over. Every day, new details surface, new rumors swirl, and instead of bringing clarity, they only make the picture darker. Was Charlie Kirk the victim of a lone gunman who snapped in the heat of the moment? Or was he the target of something much larger? A carefully orchestrated plan involving money, power, and enemies who felt threatened by what he knew? Already, we've seen the official narrative bend and shift. First, it was about political violence. Then it was about radicalization. And now it's about billionaires and secret deals. But with so many unanswered questions, it feels like a major plot twist is still waiting to explode. One that could change everything we think we know about this case. So I'll leave you with this. Do you believe this was a tragic coincidence, a random act of violence in a divided America? Or do you believe, like Candace and Erica, that Charlie Kirk was silenced by something far more sinister? Drop your thoughts below, because this is one rabbit hole that only seems to go deeper.